So if you're a global company eyeing the Japanese market, you might think your biggest hurdles are language or culture. But honestly, it's often taxes. Today, we're going to break down how multinationals strategically set themselves up to work in one of the world's most complex tax environments. Okay? Let's get into it.
Here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle the main challenge of just getting into Japan. Then, we're going to look at two key models, cost plus and buy-sell. And within that buy-sell model, we'll explore its two crucial variations, before we wrap it all up with a side-by-side comparison.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the fundamental challenge of entering the Japanese market.
So, put yourself in their shoes. You're a big global brand. The question is simple, but the answer is anything but. How do you sell your products to Japanese customers without getting hammered by taxes? Now, this isn't about dodging taxes, not at all. It's about smart, totally legal structuring. And pretty much all of it comes down to one critical concept.
And that concept is called permanent establishment, or PE for short. You can think of it like a tripwire. If your business activities in Japan are significant enough to create a PE, you've tripped the wire, and bam, suddenly you're on the hook for local corporate taxes on your profits. A huge part of the strategy we're about to cover is all about managing this PE risk.
And here is why that tripwire is such a big deal. Japan's corporate tax rate is sitting at around 30 to 34%. That's a serious number. If you accidentally create a permanent establishment, roughly a third of the profit you're making from Japan could go right to the tax authorities. So yeah, the stakes are definitely high.
Okay, so let's move on to our first model and see how companies deal with this. This is the cost-plus model, and it's all about keeping a really light footprint in Japan.
This is the perfect way to think about it. The company in Japan isn't actually the one making the sales. It's just the local guide. It might do some marketing research, maybe some admin support, but the main event, the actual sale, that all happens outside of Japan.
And this shows you exactly how the money and goods flow. The parent company, let's say in the US, sells directly to the customer in Japan. So all that revenue, it's booked in the US. The entity in Japan is basically just a support center. So the parent company covers all of its costs, salaries, rent, and then adds a little service fee on top of that. And that little something extra, that's the plus in cost plus. It's just a markup, usually somewhere between 5 and 10% of whatever the Japanese entity's costs are. That markup is the local entity's profit. And here's the kicker. It's the only part of this whole international operation that actually gets taxed in Japan.
So it all boils down to this trade-off right here. The advantage is pretty obvious. Your tax bill in Japan is going to be super low because you're only paying tax on that small service fee. And this is a huge but, the risk is that your local guide starts acting more like a salesperson and actually closing deals. If that happens, the tax authorities can just say, whoa, hold on, that's a permanent establishment, and suddenly all your Japanese sales profits get pulled into that 30+% tax net.
Which naturally brings us to the second major strategy. This one takes the exact opposite approach. Instead of trying to keep a distance, the buy-sell model is all about putting boots on the ground.
Right. So if cost plus is like hiring a local guide, buy-sell is like setting up a full-blown local franchise. This is not just some support office. We're talking about a complete business that actually takes ownership of goods and sells them in the local market. It intentionally creates a permanent establishment.
The way this works is a lot more direct. The U.S. parent sells its products to its own Japanese company. That Japanese company now legally owns the inventory. Then it turns around and sells those products to the final customers in Japan. The profit it makes on that resale, the margin, is what gets taxed locally. Simple as that.
But this model creates a brand new puzzle. What's the right price for the parent company to charge its own subsidiary? If you set it too high, there's no profit left in Japan to tax. Set it too low, and you're artificially shifting too much profit into Japan. Figuring out that just right price is a whole field of tax law called transfer pricing.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. Not all these franchises are the same. The buy-sell model actually splits into two different flavors, and it all comes down to one thing: how much risk the Japanese company is willing to take on.
So on one side, you have the low-risk distributor, or LRD. It's basically sheltered by the parent company. It doesn't take on much business risk at all. On the other side, you've got the fully fledged distributor, or FFD. This one acts like a true independent business, taking on all the market risks. And this difference is everything, because in the world of transfer pricing, profit has to follow risk.
And you can see that principle right here. For a low-risk distributor, since it's not really shouldering any danger, its expected profit margin is pretty small. We're talking maybe 1 to 5% of sales. It's stable, it's predictable, but it's low.
Now, contrast that with the fully fledged distributor, because this entity is taking on real business risks like, what if the inventory doesn't sell? What if customers don't pay their bills? It gets the chance for a much higher reward. So its profit margin is way bigger, often 5 to 15%, maybe even more, as compensation for taking on all that risk.
Okay, let's put this all together. We've gone through the cost-plus model and the two different flavors of the buy-sell model, the low-risk and fully fledged distributors. Let's see how they all stack up in a final showdown. This table really pulls it all into focus. With Cost Plus, the whole game is trying to avoid that PE risk. With both buy-sell models, a PE is a given. You've accepted it, so the focus shifts entirely to justifying your profit margin based on your transfer price. A low margin for the low-risk LRD and a high one for the high-risk FFD. Each of these structures is really just a different tool for a different job.
So when you boil it all down, what are the big takeaways? First, the structure you choose pretty much is your tax bill. Second, it's all about balancing risk and reward. You can try to minimize your presence and your taxes with a cost-plus model, or you can fully embrace a local presence with a buy-sell model, where the level of risk you take on determines your potential profit.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. We're living in a time when global tax laws are getting tougher and tax authorities are demanding way more transparency. So the million-dollar question for the future is, which of these strategies, the light-touch service company or the full-risk distributor, is actually built to last?